Welcome, everyone. My name is Jean Nader. I'm on the steering committee of Alameda Progressives, and I want to thank you for joining us tonight for this educational forum on the future of Palestine. Wanted to let you know up front that this event is being recorded and will be shown later on YouTube, so it's available for other folks to see, so please let people know. And also just to let you know that we are being recorded. The format of tonight's forum is we're going to have a speaker and who has personal experience with the issues facing folks in Palestine, and then an opportunity for folks to ask questions. You can post your questions in the comment section. I just want to say that the reason that Alameda Progressives is so excited to support this forum tonight is that ever since our group was founded in 2016, we've been very focused on the issues around human rights, social justice, and racial justice, starting with our advocacy for Alameda becoming a sanctuary city in 2016, and then in the ensuing years, holding the Saturday weekly vigils, silent vigils at Park in Santa Clara, where we really tried to draw attention to the issues around immigration and Black Lives Matter, and even other issues like healthcare. We find it's really important that people get educated about all sides of an issue and hear all the different perspectives. And that's why we're really happy to be the sponsor for tonight's forum so that folks can learn more about what's really happening in Palestine, because some of that information really doesn't get out to the general public. And so we hope that you'll take an opportunity to learn tonight, ask questions, and spread the word so that more people can be educated about what's happening in the Middle East. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Austin, Austin Tam, who's going to introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Alameda Progressives, for hosting such a important event. My name is Austin Tam. I'm currently elected delegate to the Alameda County Democratic Central Committee and a disability activist. And I'm so honored and humbled to introduce my colleague and my friend, the chair of the Arab American Caucus with the California Democratic Party, Yassar Dahbour. Shukran, thank you.
I appreciate all the work you've done to make this happen. And I appreciate the Alameda Progressives for putting this event together and for all the audience who came to learn more. As I was actually speaking prior to this presentation to the fine men and women of the Progressives, that we literally, as Palestinian, we have been dying for 73 years to make our voices heard, because we know for a fact that without people support and solidarity, Palestine will not be free. So thank you for taking one step that closer to make that dream happen. And I'm glad to be here with you to give you a quick crash course. If we want to talk about the future of Palestine, we really need to give a crash course on the history that led up to this momentum. Now that the American public opinion has been changing in favor of Palestinian state, and I believe this is due mainly to the fact that thank goodness for the internet that made the world a much smaller place. And with that, actually, I'm going to start first. Sharing my quick presentation, which really it's merely a chronological order of event that might help you visualize things and put things into perspective. So you've heard probably, I'm going to assume that I'm speaking to somebody who doesn't have much of background, so that's why I'm starting with the basics leading up to the current momentum. So probably you've heard a lot about the Arab-Israeli conflict, that it's complicated, that it's endless war that goes for thousands of years, that there was no Palestine before, and that Israel was the natural result of the Holocaust, to find a place for the Jews, to find a safe haven for them, and that it's or other things I've heard, that it's uh, a religious war that's going on. None of that is true. As a matter of fact, that's propaganda that try to boggle your mind. And as I'm going to elaborate in this conversation, in this quick presentation or crash course, that really this is Palestine is just another colonial project that started at the beginning of last century, and that today we're just looking at it just like the what happened, like the French occupation of Algeria, or the British occupation of Egypt, or India, or China. This is just another colonial project, and all these claims that they try to make to Palestine is unfounded. And this is again a Palestinian perspectives on things. If you want to hear the Israeli, probably that's what you've been hearing for all these years on CNN, Fox News, New York Times. Now this is Palestinian perspectives on things. So let's start with that. One thing I would like to actually allude to before proceeding also, one thing in America, historically there has been two camps, one that is isolationist and one that is humanist. I call it the humanist. The isolationist is started early on, that basically, we're far away from the rest of the world. We should basically just concentrate on what's good for us, and America comes first and everything comes next. Everything else comes next. Whereas the humanist always looked that we are part of this world. We cannot live in isolation. What happens what happens in other parts of the world affect us, and vice versa. And in civil rights, words of the great Martin Luther King, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. That's a perspective that today make me want to reach out to you, find people to call for your support and your action to support the Palestinian in their struggle for self-determination and independent state. So this is a quick chronology of events, starting with Zionism in 1897. So basically, in 1897, there was the first Zionist conference held in Basel in Switzerland, and in that conference, the main topic actually was where to establish a Jewish national homeland, due to the anti-Semitism that was spread in Europe. The Jewish population, got together. There was a new Zionist movement, started by a book by an author named Tudor Herzl, who is considered to be the founding father of Zionism. Now, this could be seen as a normal nationalistic movement, except the problem with it is that when they selected Palestine, and mind you, Palestine was not the only option. On that, some of the options that were on the table, Uganda, Libya, even some say actually parts of the United States were proposed as possible states or possible places to establish a Jewish national homeland. Problem with that is, again, was that really a true nationalism or colonialism? Now, if it was only just about a group of people getting together, trying to establish a national homeland for themselves, that's one thing. But when they selected Palestine, that was already inhabited by the indigenous Palestinian, that included elements of ethnic cleansing. From the beginning, they were talking a home without people to people or a land without people to people without land. From the get-go, they dismissed the Palestinian, they dismissed their existence, and they wanted them, basically they dealt with them as if they were not there. And so elements of racism was already there from the get-go. And for that theory or that ideology to go on, as I will elaborate later on, apartheid was prone to it, that they're going to live in an apartheid-like state. Moving on, so as Ilan Pape, and one thing I need to actually, it's good to talk about here is, the only claim that the Zionists brought to Palestine, or the only claim that the Zionists have for Palestine, is religious based. It's based on religion, that God promised them that land. The funny part, as the good words of Ilan Pape, and a prominent Israeli historian, he said most Zionists do not believe in God, yet that they believe that God promised them that land. And there are many saying to that effect, but we will revisit this as we proceed. But this was the inception of Zionism. And mind you, they would tell you this is 1897, about 50 years before the Holocaust. Certainly, the Holocaust gave a boost to that movement because in the beginning, when Zionists first came, they really faced an uphill battle with the religious rabbis and synagogues who did not believe that, they just believe that Judaism, like any other religion, is just a belief system, and therefore should not be, that is not nationalistic calling per se. And however, I contend that Zionism really hijacked, good parts of, or sizable part of Judaism, and transforming it into a nationalistic calling. And that's where the problem starts. And as I will elaborate later on, you will see that most of the people who came to Palestine were Western European, who not necessarily had anything to do with the land except for these religious claims. Sykes-Picot of 1916. So if you look at this map, now, mind you, in 1897, Palestine was still part of the Ottoman Empire as a region. And at the end of World War I, and as you know, the Ottoman Empire was defeated then, the colonialist power got together, mainly France and England, and they decided to divide what was once the empire, the Ottoman Empire, as two areas of influence to the French and between the French and the British. So this is the original land, and it might not be very clear, but this was a historic document. So I actually am going to use something you're more familiar with. So if you look at it right here, this part right here, this is Palestine. So this area right here was to be a British influence. This were to be the blue zone on top. This was to be French. And anyway, there was some modification. The Russian were part of the deal. Then they were taken out of the deal. But what ended up transpiring after this, if you look, this is the Levant. This is Syria right here on top. This is Lebanon. This is Palestine right here. This is Jordan. And here to the east is Iraq. So this is how it ended up being. Palestine became a British mandate, Palestine and Jordan. Syria and Lebanon became French mandates. So basically, they divided up these parts, and this is what I'm going to concentrate on. I don't want to talk about the larger Sykes-Picot Accord, but this is the area of the Middle East that we're concentrating on for today's conversation's sake. So British, as I showed in the prior slide, assumed the control of Palestine. In 1917, they issued the Balfour Declaration, basically promising a national homeland for the Jews in Palestine at the expense of the Palestinians. Now, there has been so many things between the 1915 and 1948, but just jumping right to it, basically the British who brought who facilitated migration of Western Jews from Europe to Palestine between 1917 and 1948. They trained them. They provided them with arms. At the same time, if Palestinian owned as much as a bullet, was executed. And then when the moment came, there was the scenario now the Israeli called the War of Independence, that they fought the British and liberated their land from under the British rule, trying to show themselves as another liberation movement, which is unfounded, because in 1917, as I showed, the intention of the British originally was to give a homeland for the Jews in Palestine. So when the moment came, the British pulled out. They have this, what they call, actually before that, the British said we couldn't handle the situation in Palestine, the situation that they created by bringing the Zionists into Palestine, and they went to the UN. And the UN issued the partition plan, as you see it right here. The blue part was to be Israel, and this area right here is to be the Arab or Palestine, pretty much. But what happened? Palestinians were not even sitting on the table. They didn't negotiate because, again, because of the racist approach of the British, that we, by definition, the mandate, or not by definition, but really what a mandate means, that people were not developed enough to speak for themselves. So the British sat on our behalf on the table, and they came up with this map. Now, the Palestinians have everything to lose and nothing to win. So, of course, they rejected that. Israeli had everything to, or the Zionists had everything to win. They had nothing, and now they have a state. So Palestinians decided to rebel against it. The well-equipped and well-trained Zionist gangs at the time, they were actually smaller gangs all over the place, they fought, and as a result, they actually occupied more than even what the partition was giving to them. This is what they actually got. They got all this area, and they occupied basically all this yellow area right here. What you see in green was still not occupied. They will occupy it in 1967, and I'll get to that. But I'd like you to compare the two maps. This is the partition plan of 1947. This is what they got as a result of the 1948 war, what we call a Nakba from our perspective as Palestinian, or disaster, because we lost, 78% of our land. Moving on, so this one I'd like to show you, and this is what I was alluding to before. I want you to notice something here. In 1870, and this is actually statistics, in 1870, only 2% of the population of Palestine was Jewish. Was that of the Jewish population was only 2%. 98% of that were Muslims and Christians. And as you go through the year, and you notice here, the difference starting in 1920, going upward, see the drastic increase of the Jewish population increase, and that's because of facilitating the Zionist migration into Palestine at the expense of the Palestinians. The Palestinian Revolution started in 1965. Now, first, the Arab countries created what they call the Palestine Liberation Organization, and that was really sort of a formality more than anything. And they wanted to pretty much have all the Palestinian involved in, they didn't want troubles in their own land, because now all the refugees, as a result of and I have probably to explain a little bit more here, as a result of the establishment of the State of Israel, about 750,000 Palestinians were expelled from their homeland. Over 500 villages were totally obliterated, exterminated, and most of these people went to the surrounding Arab countries. So the Arab countries, in response to that, because they didn't want these people, the Palestinian, to cause trouble in their own countries, they created this PLO for them, hoping that sort of to tame them through that entity. But what happened is that the Fatah movement that actually started in 1965 started that armed struggle against Israel and gained popularity, and as a result, gained control of the PLO. And now many other factions went under the umbrella of the PLO. The PFLP, the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine, Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, and many other went all under the umbrella of the PLO, led by Fatah and Yassar Arafat. All of them believed in the armed struggles and all means necessary to liberate Palestine. Now, after the PLO was actually pretty much expelled from Lebanon after the 1980 war, when Israel invaded Lebanon, then the first intifada, or uprising, broke out in Palestine. And it was a popular uprising calling for independence, for self-determination, and the like. Now, again, because we're going really quick, this movement or this uprising ended when the PLO sat down and decided to have a peace talk with Israel for the purpose of having a two-state solution. Now, mind you, in 1987, that's also the beginning of Hamas, because I know many people are interested in that. But Hamas started actually in 1987. That's when it started. But when the peace talk broke in 2000, and the Palestinians, after having negotiated with the Israelis for so many years and so that they were going nowhere, the second intifada broke out. And that went on till 2004. And that's when the Israeli really kind of crashed it, pretty much. And Palestinians resorted to peaceful struggle. But this, we'll talk about it some more in the next slides. So I know I went ahead talking about the Palestinian Revolution, but I just wanted to tell you what happened in 1967, since I'm going in chronological order. In the Six-Day War, what happened, as probably many of you know, Israel occupied the rest of Palestine, Gaza, the West Bank, and parts of the Golan Heights, as well as the Sinai Peninsula, which later returned to Egypt after the peace accord with Egypt, with Sadat. But Israel today occupies all this shaded area here that you see. The Golan Heights still occupied by Israel, which Donald Trump recognized as the state of Israel against the will of the international community, as well as the West Bank and Gaza. So the peace talks that I started talking about when I went briefly over the history of the Palestinian Revolution. The peace talk basically is talking about dividing the land based on the 1967 and 1948 boundaries. And they wanted to, from Palestinian perspective, they wanted the Palestinian land in the West Bank and Gaza, which constitute 22% of Palestine. And they started first with Gaza and a small city, the oldest city in the world, Jericho, which actually located right here. They started out with that, and that was to be the first step while negotiating more with the Israelis to gain more control of the West Bank and to establish a Palestinian homeland. Now, problems with the two-state solution. Some of the problem, to start with, the negotiation was over 22% of historical Palestine. And not only that, the Israeli wanted to annex about 60% of the 22% of what was left of Palestine. 60% of the 22% that was left of historical Palestine. The Israeli refused to grant sovereignty for an independent Palestinian state. And while Israeli were negotiating with the Palestinian, at the same time, the amount of settlement building, and settlement, basically it's land they stole from this 22%, stolen and recognized internationally as a stolen land. They declared first military zones or archaeological territories that later becomes Israeli land, and before we know it, we have some trailers on the land, and before you know it, they start building houses for settlers, and then they bring over colonial settlers, Jewish colonial settlers, for those who would like to be more specific, and on stolen Palestinian land. So another problem with the two-state solution, that Israel refuses to give up any parts of Eastern Jerusalem where the Palestinian aspire to have their capital, the capital of their homeland. Further, Israel refused to release the prisoners. They call them terrorists. I mean, when you sit down with your enemy, supposedly, and you're negotiating, especially when you're talking about national liberation, of course, those people who fought against you, those who were the freedom fighters, who forced you to sit down with your enemy to come to a solution. Israel never released, all the prisoners. As a matter of fact, the prisoners were supposed to be released at the early stages of the negotiation. Further, Israel refuses the right of return, and that was a very contentious point. As I said, now the 750,000 Palestinians that were originally expelled from Palestine, today they number more than 6 million around the world. And actually, there is no specific number as to how many refugees we have worldwide, because now the total Palestinian population is estimated anywhere between 13 million up to 21 millions. In historical Palestine today, we have roughly 6 million Palestinians left. So these were some of the obstacles to the two-state solution. And, for years now, the Palestinian and Israeli have not been talking. The Israelis have been building more settlements, annexing more land. And what you saw at Sheikh Jarrah lately is not an isolated incident. It's just a lucky thing for the people of Sheikh Jarrah that we have two young people, a twin, by Mona and Muhammad al-Kurd, who were actually on social media giving update to their colleagues and building networks of support and solidarity. And that's what we learned about it here in America and worldwide. And it unfolded the way you saw. But we will get that later on. So this is actually, I just want to give you some imagery. So these red dots is what constitute the settlement through the West Bank. And if you want to see better, now the West Bank is actually, according to the negotiation or the Oslo Accord, the West Bank was actually divided into three parts, A, B, and C. A, B under security and under the security and the administration of the Palestinian territory, and those were mostly like the big cities. And area B, which is under Palestinian administration but Israeli security. And area C, which you see right here, which is the largest part, 60% of the West Bank. This area was under both Israeli security and administrative control. And now this is the area that Israel wants to control. So let's see how the map looks like over the years. So this is Palestine in 1897, beginning of Zionism, and this is where it is today. This is historical Palestine. So if you would understand the agony of Palestinian to see how much they give up or how much they lost over the years, this is the reason why. This is where we started. This is where we ended. Moving on, just to give some chance for conversation and discussion. The international now, since actually the stalemate in negotiation, Palestinians have really reached a point of you may call it desperation, that they started reaching out to the international community and to people like you and like people in Africa, Asia, America, Latin America, to find some support and to seeking to use the South African liberation model. And that is to form a network among worldwide to boycott Israeli products and to boycott the products of companies that support Israel and the occupation. To employ peaceful and boycott and divestment and sanction is a peaceful mean. It's doesn't call for any armed struggle or the like, and that is really proved to be very, very effective. That Israel is being very scared of BDS, and lately, if you notice, the Israeli lobby here in America, they have been actually trying to silence us by incriminating boycott, divestment, and sanctions. And many states, actually, I want to say about 40 states, passed some laws to that effect. But one by one, they're being knocked down by the Supreme Court of the states, saying that this goes straight against our freedom of expression. Not only that, our government has been really complicit in these tactics. Not only we have been financing the occupation of Palestine, our government has been financing it, as you know, by $3.8 billion that we pay annually to Israel. And actually, believe it or not, after the last assault in Gaza, they have the audacity to come to us and ask for $1 billion in urgent assistance. $3.8 billion, that translates to almost roughly $11 million. So our government not only complicit by financing and by being silent on Israel's crime, but also in shielding it from international criticism, from UN resolutions that called for Israel to yield for a Palestinian state, and basically it makes every single one of us as taxpayers complicit in this crime, whether we like it or not, because we effectively pay for apartheid, we pay for occupation. And on that, we have more to say. Now, what's the future of Palestine? Now, let me put it this way. Palestinians recognize, they started with armed struggle. They wanted to liberate all of Palestine. Over the years, they became more realistic that, yes, we have some people already here, they have homes, they have lands, etc. They said, okay, how about two-state solution? Israel killed the two-state solution because of its refusal to yield on the issues I talked about earlier: right of return, Jerusalem, sovereignty for Palestinians, and building and annexing land left and right. That, as you notice now, the West Bank looks like Swiss cheese. There is no way to separate it without having Battlestans or little islands where Palestinians live between walls, as you saw, the separation walls that they built. And they killed that solution. So Palestinians resorted to other means, peaceful means, trying to, by which I just covered, the BDS and the like. And what they did to us is basically they tried to incriminate us. They tried to put gag orders against us. Look at the fights we're having, actually, the struggle we're having in the university, trying to expel students, intimidate them, the pro-Palestinian students. The Canary mission, I don't know if you're familiar with it, look it up. It basically looks for Palestinian activists or pro-Palestinian activists in colleges, and they try to trash their reputation and really affect their careers and futures by claiming that they're anti-Semitic and calling them by all kind of racist names. Another thing they did, in addition to trying to incriminate BDS and steal these peaceful means, is they try to redefine anti-Semitism. So anti-Semitism, which an expression I hate to use, I'd rather say anti-Jewish. Why use this anti-Semite, this middle-aged kind of term? If you want to say acts that are against the Jews, just call it anti-Jewish, because I have a problem with anti-Semitic. Not only we as Arab and Palestinian are Semitic, but also they try to make such an enigmatic thing about it. And today you will understand why, because they try to expand it. They try to equate criticizing Israel with anti-Semitism, criticizing Zionism with anti-Semitism. That's why I say call it anti-Jewishness. So now they're talking about the rise of anti-Semitism in the United States. I contend that Israel is responsible for the rise of anti-Jewishness worldwide. It's not that I condone this act, worldwide, but unfortunately, the simple-mindedness of people who saw that Israel is continuing in oppressing people, they try to take it out on peaceful Jewish people living abroad. And that's in our struggle for liberation, we don't condone any hate messaging, any attack against Judaism as a religion or against the belief of the Jewish people. And there's no place for anti-Jewish in our struggle. We are anti-occupiers, anti-oppression, anti-apartheid. That's what we stand against. So today, what leaves us really, we have a one-state solution. I just ran a really quick list and I was just kind of brainstorming. So pros and cons, the state already exists. Look at it in Palestine. Already, there is one land and two people, okay? And there is a space to bring all the Palestinian. One thing I need to let you know, and hopefully we'll cover it during our discussion, some of the racist policies of Israel. So the Palestinian now, and let me just go quickly actually here. I want to pick any of these maps. Let's just look at this right now, this map right here. So this is Israel for one is not, it's the one state in the world that has no defined boundaries. Unlike the United States, we know who's north, who's south. We know we have Canada in the north. We have Mexico. We have exact border lines. Israel does not have that. Why? Because it has a colonial imperial project. They want to keep on expanding. They don't want to stop there. They want more. They want the greater Israel that extends all the way from the Euphrates to the Nile. So this is some of the policies now in the West Bank, for example. The settlers who live in the West Bank, if they need to face the law, they deal with the Israeli civil law. Whereas Palestinian under occupation, they have to face military law. And there's wide difference between the two. In what the green area, that is, you may consider proper Israel, quote unquote, there are about 60 laws discriminated against Palestinian Arabs who stayed behind, after Israel, quote unquote, independence. And those people are treated as second-class citizens, if not third. One of these laws, just to elaborate, allow any Jewish community the right to refuse for a Palestinian family to live amongst themselves. Another example of racism of Israel. Any of the listener, if you are of the Jewish belief, you could go right now, land at Tel Aviv airport and walk and say, I'm Jewish and I want to migrate here, claim my birthright. On the spot, you become an Israeli. I, who lived in the city of Haifa right here, I live in refugee camps. I lived in refugee camps, and we have millions of Palestinians who are still in refugee camps and scattered all over the world. We have no right to enter Palestine except using foreign citizenship like my US passport. I could go as an American, not as a Palestinian. I cannot claim my property or the property of my forefathers. What happened in Sheikh Jarrah, and this is probably where I'm going to end this to open to Q&A. So what happened in Sheikh Jarrah, so that you know, it's one of the suburbs of Jerusalem, and so the land in 1956, some Palestinians were exiled from their land by Israel, and at the time, the West Bank was under the Jordanian administration. So they built these homes for them, and on land that was, under the control of the Jordanian, and for these people to live in it. And now, years later, now the Israeli says, now this belonged from the 1800s. It belonged to some obscure Jewish family who owned the land, and they want to claim it. I don't want to get into that, the details, but I would like to point out something. For somebody to go actually before Israeli courts and to claim what once, even if we were to accept this story at face value, and assuming there is a Jewish family who owned this land, well, how about all the Palestinians who owned what today is Israel, the lands, the houses? We have no rights to go and claim what was the property of our forefathers. So with that, I'd like to actually, go back, to the two-state solution, the one-state solution, and I'd like to keep, just put it up and just quickly go. What's the pros? It's already there. Equal, one individual, one vote, equality for all. Two-state solution is dead. They killed it. It's one secular state with a freedom of belief for everybody. The cons: U.S. complicity in financing, supporting, and shielding Israel. Israel's refusal to give up on its colonial aspiration. As I said, Israel today is the only state in the world that does not define its borders. Of course, in addition to that is racism and apartheid. And as I elaborated to you about the discrimination against what they call Israeli Arabs, those who live in proper Israel, and the Palestinian and the West Bank and Gaza and the Palestinian territories, two different laws. And that's exactly the definition of apartheid, having two legal systems in the same state, one that favor one segment of the population and discriminate against the other. And on that, actually, I would like to bring you as an Arab American or Palestinian American. Some laws discriminate against us. I'll give you two examples. For one, those Palestinians who live in Jerusalem and have a residency card to live in Jerusalem, they come from there and they have dual, per se, citizenship, that of mostly Jordanian, because Jordanian was at the time administering Jerusalem prior to 1967. And they have an ID called Residency Jerusalem ID card and an American passport. If they were to leave Jerusalem for an extended period of time, they have to face an ultimatum, either to give up their U.S. citizenship or to give up their residency in Jerusalem. American Jews don't have to face that ultimatum, never, or any of the other citizenship that they carry. As you know, they came from all over the world. Another example, and I'll end with that. For me, I cannot go. For example, not for me, but for those Palestinians who have American citizenship and are from the West Bank and Gaza, they're not allowed to fly to Tel Aviv airport. They have to go through Jordan or through Egypt and face the humiliation that the rest of the Palestinians have to face. Unlike you, who are not, you don't have a citizenship or you're not Palestinian, you could go through the airport, travel freely with no question asked. Not to mention other examples, the cross points, the separation wall, etc., etc. With that, I'd like to conclude and open the conversation for discussion. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Yassar. We're going to go to a time of Q&A. If you have any questions for Yassar, please put it in the comment section, and then we'll be screening the questions and then open up the dialogue further. We do have a first question from Gabby asking if you could touch on the Abraham Accords, say a word about that.
Okay. So the Abraham Accord is a deceptive, starting with the name, trying to say that, the Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, being the Abrahamic religion, they all, Abraham was the father of all the prophets that came after. That should unify us. Trying to resort to that religious, biblical name, really in details, it's about killing the notion of Palestinian statehood. It's about substituting land, allowing Israel to annex the 60% the land that I showed you, to maybe allow Palestinian a state in Gaza and give him actually some land in the Sinai desert instead. Whereas the Palestinian who live in the West Bank, they will live in Pakistans and little islands under the control of the Israelis, and maybe under the administration of Jordan. And Israelis had everything to win from that. And again, we had nothing but to lose everything. In a nutshell, that's what the Abrahamic Accord is about. Of course, there's some economic package and support, and they were going to bribe the Palestinian with billions of dollars. One thing about the Palestinian Authority and those factions, that the revolutionary Palestinian factions, they refused it. Nobody sat down. They found no Palestinian would actually accept to even entertain the idea.
Thank you. In your presentation, you point to the one-state solution as the direction that we're heading. I mean, I think you're among many voices who are saying two-state solution is over, and it is time to move forward toward a one-state solution. What do you see as the steps moving forward into that direction and that reality?
Okay. As I mentioned, actually, and going back, the biggest obstacle I see here, U.S. complicity in financing and supporting Israel. We need to stop. We need to put pressure. We should not be paying the tabs for occupation, for apartheid, for oppression. We need to use that's why I love to have events like this to educate people about what's really happening. 3.8 billion from our tax money that we could use for our homelessness, for our for ailing education system, for the many projects that we could use at home. Instead, we pay it to Israel to sustain its occupation and its oppression of the Palestinian people. That needs to stop as a precondition for a one-state solution. Two, U.S. emboldens Israel. U.S. emboldens Israel by shielding it from international criticism. You know what? Just this year, Beit Salem, a prominent Israeli human rights watchdog, and Human Rights Watch, both called Israel an apartheid. Today, today, two former Israeli ambassadors to South Africa called Israel apartheid. So, when the world is moving in that direction, our government's still trying to shield it, saying, no, the world is ganging up on poor Israel that is now a superpower, a nuclear power, who hasn't admitted to that, or the U.S. does not want, covers again, even an Israeli enigma about whether or not they have nuclear weapons. Everybody knows it. And actually now people estimate that Israel has about 300 nuclear bombs. So the biggest thing we could do in the United States is to actually, let's say, channel the support in the right direction. HR 2590 that is now being circulated in the Congress. We need to actually reach out for our Congress, for our people, and try to adopt this, this bill, because it's finally a humanized Palestinian. Although it doesn't call actually for stopping the aid, it says do not use it to oppress Palestinians, to oppress the children, to annex land, and etc., etc. So that's we need more bills like that. And further, we need to reach out, have really, what we need is a revolution within the Israeli society, for people to rise up and say, we don't want to live at the expense of other people. Enough oppression. And you know what? Believe it or not, even the Israelis themselves, they're shielded from what the occupation is doing. Just few miles away, in the occupied territories. They don't know. They've been fed these lies over the years, these propaganda. that Palestinian, the savages, they want to just kill him and throw him all in the sea, and all these story that they made up. So these are prerequisite. We need to build an international consensus and international pressure to make the Israeli government yield. As a matter of fact, lately, for the past 30 years, we have but more and more radical Israeli government, one after the other. Netanyahu, everybody now, they're trying to say, oh, the problem is Netanyahu. No, problem is not Netanyahu. Naftali Bennett, who's coming over now, who's actually came from San Francisco. His parents came from San Francisco and migrated to Palestine. Now he's the same thing. He already said he will do anything to prevent the Palestinian state from coming into being. He will not allow. He sees no problem in killing Palestinians. He said, I did that many a times. I don't see a problem with. He's another racist. The Zionism itself is a racist ideology. It could be, as I said, if it wasn't for having picked a country that already populated with indigenous people, it might have been an okay ideology. Had they said, okay, maybe Germany, who cost the Jews so much, probably should have given part of it for the Jews. I would support them, when they're calling, go for it. But we shouldn't be paying for the mistake, for what the German and the Nazi German did to the Jews. So that's, all these are prerequisites for a one-state solution.
I want to come back to the Israeli government, the politics there, but I want to continue on the theme of the U.S. policy, because we have a question from someone asking, do you think President Biden will reduce monetary support of Israel with increased pressure?
I really have no crystal ball, but so far, what people really, let me just put it this way. Biden historically identified himself as a Zionist. Biden said, if there was no Israel, this is one of his famous sayings, if there was no Israel, we should invent or create Israel. What we saw from movement or trying to undo some of the policies of the prior administration, Trump's administration, it sounded so good, but really he just took it back to pre-Trump policies. So he hasn't really done anything like outstanding in support of the Palestinian. He just took it a step back. He's trying to wipe up the horrible mistake that were done by Trump. But where do we see for example, he started supporting the Palestinian Authority that existed during Barack Obama. He started funding the UNRWA at lower levels, mind you, than what was during Barack Obama. He reopened or wants to reopen the PLO office in Washington, D.C., which existed already during the the Obama administration. He didn't recognize the annexation, and that was the same case with Obama. So materially, he has not done anything new to show that he's actually taking on more even-handed. One thing actually we should say as Democrats, in our fights, and we all know this, we still have a fight even within the Democratic Party between the establishment and the corporate Democrats, and between the progressive, and especially, and actually even within our progressive, those we call them PIP, the Progressive Accepting Palestine. We still have an uphill battle. I believe the vast majority of Democrats today are in support of Palestine, and I believe that what caused the pressure on Biden to move to stop, to make or to bring a ceasefire into effect 11 days after giving Netanyahu 11 days to take Palestinian flesh and blood, to basically tell his electorate that, hey, I'm still a strong leader. And he is the one who approved $735 million in a weapons sale even before the end of the war. So is he? I hope he'll surprise me. But so far, I haven't seen anything that he actually material to show that he's willing to take a more even-handed approach. But the only good indicator that it seems our pressure, he yielded to our pressure. He did make the war stop 11 days. The last wars went for months. So I could be thankful for that only. And thankful that he is yielding to our pressure. So we need to keep it on.
Given your assessment of Biden's track record and somewhat pessimistic view about what he stands for, can you tell us some of the progress you feel that you've been making within the Democratic Party as the chair of the Arab Caucus for California?
Okay, so I'm on my second term right now as a delegate. And I was just elected as a chair. I was the vice chair in the last term. I am the chair of the Arab American Caucus. In the last term, we did, believe it or not, the platform of the Democratic Party called Jerusalem the Eternal Jewish Capital of the State of Israel. We were able to take that language out because supposedly these were final status matters to be negotiated between the Israelis and the Palestinians. And we were able, with the assistance and help of our friends and allies and the progressive, among the progressive Democrats, we were able to strike down that language. There was a language about incriminating BDS, and we were able to strike that language. We did pass a few resolutions condemning Trump, condemning, calling for our Democrat officials to take more even-handed approach. So that is good. But you know what? We need, I believe, and I'm going to try to work even harder with my colleagues in democratizing our Democratic Party, to claim democracy back in the Democratic Party. Because as the process right now, I'll tell you, there are many gatekeepers. Go for the resolution committee. I'll give you an example. When it comes to Palestine, I write a resolution, I submit it. They take the resolution and they change it any way they want to something that might not even look like my original resolution. And then when it's time to present it, they say, that's your resolution, take it or leave it. And it's from that moment on, it's the possession of the party. That means all that, because in the past, if they refuse, you don't come to consensus with the committee, the resolution committee, you had the chance before. If they refuse, if you don't reach an agreement, you could collect signature and take that resolution and present it to the larger convention and possibly pass it. But what we have right now, we have gatekeepers. They will not say no to your resolution, but they'll change it any way they want. If you accept it, fine. If you don't accept it, they'll pass it anyway. So, and this is just an example. So we need to hit, the rules committee. We need to really make sure that the resolution, the legislation, the platform really express the wishes and the will of the base of the Democratic Party. As it is right now, that's how we're being silenced. Because if you don't change the discourse by changing the definition of things and using the right words within the Democratic Party, where's the democracy in the Democratic Party? We will still be at the mercy of the gatekeepers, we progressives, and we being people who advocate national liberation worldwide.
Given what you've said about the gatekeepers in the Democratic Party, we have a question about what can the County Democratic Central Committee do to help mobilize and shift things forward, particularly around tax dollars?
As I said, for example, now we have a campaign for HR 2590 introduced by Betty McCollum, and that's calling on the administration not to halt the aid to Israel, the $3.8 billion a year to Israel, but to restrict Israel from using it in oppressing Palestinians, in using it to annex more land, in building prisons, in using any method that might aid in oppressing Palestinians. So what you can do is write this resolution, make sure that they are endorsed by your local central committee, and raise recommendation. And when you come to the convention, make your voice heard, write resolutions, write amendment to the platform, make it more accessible to the base. So there are so many things you can do actually. Reach to your local election. See, here's the thing, and one of the reasons, I mean, for 30 years, I've been here in this country for 30 years now. I only joined the Democratic Party like 3 years ago. And I so regret the fact I've always been registered Democrat, but only the past 3 years I actually ran as a delegate and became one. But here's what I found in the past as a Palestinian activist or as a civil rights activist. I'll go knocking at the doors of our elected officials, and they wouldn't listen to me. Whereas when you go, use your title as be it a member of the central committees, local central committees, or as a delegate. And when you reach out to your local officials, be it the Senate, be it the assembly member, be it the congressman or woman, and when you knock at the door, you have more leverage. Use it. Pass a message. Tell them we don't want more. We don't want to finance apartheid. We don't want our tax money to pay for the oppression of Palestinians. That's the way to do it, in addition to what I saw about endorsing bills and writing resolution and the like.
Speaking about HR 2590, it seems in California, the congresspersons are not as supportive or, as co-signers to the legislation. What do you attribute that to?
Well, I mean, to tell you the truth, things are changing. Things are shifting. Of the Congress people, actually, now we have more Congress members endorsed or supported the resolution in tens, not much yet, but things are changing. Now, why our congressional members of, the Congress members of California? Maybe because we haven't put enough pressure on them. Also, the pro-Israeli lobby is still strong. They're losing, and I know actually many people saying that the latest assault in Gaza and subsequent demonstrations and the support that was voiced out against Israel and in support of the Palestinians, they feel that they're losing ground big time. But that is not to say that they don't have power. They still have millions and millions of dollars to contribute to campaigns, to set their agenda first above your voices. That money is, the blood of politics. We know that. Every politician wants to run for, has another campaign or another seat he or she wants to assume. And money is the biggest tool that de-democratize our system, because basically they buy leverage that the base doesn't have. They try to silence you with the money, but by giving more prominence to their demands above yours when they donate to the campaigns of the electeds or those who are running for seats. So
you've touched on this question in a number of different ways, but the question comes to us: why does the U.S. continue to finance the settler colonialism of Israel when injustice of ethnic cleansing is so obvious?
Because we haven't, as I said, because we haven't done enough. Well, I don't want to say we haven't done enough. We haven't built enough pressure, but I believe the momentum now is here. Things are changing. For the first time, New York Times, in its Sunday paper, shows 4 families, devastated family in Gaza, as a result of the Israeli assault. On the front page, the day after, they showed the photos of 66 Palestinian children that were killed in the last assault, and says with a comment, they were only children. This is a New York Times, and don't be mistaken. It's not a liberal newspaper. It's not a progressive paper. It's just progressive. It's one of those progressive except in Palestine. But things are shifting. I, for one, had people reaching out to me from the media when we used to really knock at their doors day and night, trying to write an article or make an appearance to say our point of view. Things are shifting. Things are changing. we have a momentum and we need to build on it. So we need to do more. And I really believe that right now we have that momentum. Let's keep the momentum going. Let's build on it, and shoulder to shoulder, we could make it happen.
Okay. We have a couple of last questions. We are running close to our time. One is about reparations. We hear about the back reparations bill in Congress moving forward. What do you think about the idea of reparations for damage and destruction that's been done to Palestinians over the years?
I mean, here's the deal, and thank you for bringing that up. For one, I was born in a refugee camp in Syria. My father was on his second birthday, actually, April 21st, 1948, in the state of having his second birthday celebrated by his family. They carried him and they crossed the border to Lebanon and then to Syria and started their life in the diaspora in a refugee camp. First, they lived in caves, then they moved into tents, and then they started actually building up what became refugee camps. So the majority of both my parents, my late father and my late mother, they met in Syria. That's where they get married. That's where I was born. The majority of the family lived, and they were expelled from Palestine in 1948. So the vast majority of the family was in Syria. In 2011, when the civil war broke out in Syria, now today, probably 20% of my family still live in Syria. The rest are scattered over 4 different continents and more than 20 countries. The point I'm trying to make here, the Nakba, the disaster, we're still paying for it. It's still relevant. So those who tell you, oh, Palestinians keep talking about it. No, we're still living the consequences of it. We're still paying the price of the Nakba. So all these Palestinians living in diaspora away from their homeland, we're still paying for it. So talking about reparation, of course, we're not asking for only right of returns. Palestinians also deserve compensation and reparation for everything they suffered because of the occupation and the oppression. And that's why the Israelis today, they're trying to think ahead, and they're trying to say, how about the reparation for the Jews who were expelled? And that's a different story. I could talk about it in a different presentation. Those were the Jews who came actually from Arab countries to Palestine, that their properties that were left behind and everything, they need to make a claim for it. And the point, I think they tried to build just in case, if we sat down and reach a point of actually talking about reparation, they want to say, oh, tit for tat. What the Arab Jews left behind for what the Palestinian were forced to leave behind. So, but is it a demand? Absolutely. I mean, for me today, I want to return. I mean, as a refugee, I want to return to Haifa, not to Jerusalem, as holy as that might be to anybody. Haifa is more important to me than any place because that's my homeland. That's where my grandparents came from. And I want to return to Palestine. And I want reparation for the suffering that my family had to go through since they were exiled from Palestine up until today. And we deserve it. We did not commit this oppression and this crime against humanity. They did. And they have to pay for it, just like the same way, and it's only fair, just like the Nazi or Germany paid for the mistakes of the Nazi, they need to pay for the mistake they did to us.
Can you hang on for a couple more minutes? We have a couple more questions that came in.
Absolutely, I have all the time.
So we have a question coming from, looks like philanthropy. Do you have any ideas on how philanthropic community foundations might support the BDS movement without losing donors who support Israel?
So I mean, whoever asked the question said it. Yes, if you want to support Palestine, your livelihood might be threatened. Your career might be threatened. Again, look at the Canary mission. those activists who spoke up in colleges. They look it up, by the way. I encourage everybody to look. Canary Mission. And this terrorizing tactic to get the names and to chastise them on the web by making up stories and calling them anti-Semitic and anti-Jews and, etc. So how there is always a way. I mean, you could always, build, probably if your funding comes from supporters of Israel, reach for a more grassroots support that does not rely on people with agenda that could heavily be influential in your own free will. So I don't know if this answers the question, but if there is a will, there's always a way. How? Look for different funding, different grants. Reach an area that does not have funding and support that comes with strings attached. Probably write some grants for that purpose. Some philanthropy, for devoted to this particular issue. Put it in the forefront and see if some people would actually be willing to support such a project.
Thank you. I want to come back to the conversation around one-state solution and the Israeli side of things. And you kind of were alluding to the government in Israel and kind of the dynamics happening there. What do you see taking place now that even gives you a glimmer of hope that Israeli society would accept a one-state solution and have it be democratic?
Start with what happened today. Two former Israeli ambassadors to South Africa, former officials coming out saying Israel is apartheid. Beit Salem, Israeli, the most prominent Israeli Human Rights Watch, January of this year, called it what it is, Israel. Before you deal, called it apartheid. Before you treat a patient, first you need to get the right diagnosis. And now you have voices within the Israeli society. They're fearless. They're coming out against the will of this radicalized society, and they're speaking up. They're holding demonstrations on the street. But we need more. And I think now the door is open, and we're having more voices, more brave voices, and brave hearts who are coming out and calling it for what it is. So once and that's what I meant earlier by changing the terms of the discourse, like what we were saying on the Democratic Party. Same thing has to happen within the Israeli society. Call things by their names. I mean, we know Israel, and they cannot deny this. They have 60 laws discriminating against Israeli Arabs. They have Palestinians in the West Bank are dealt with by military law, whereas the Israeli colonial settlers, they have, if they need to go before court, they go by civil Israeli laws. This is the definition. Look it up. Don't take. By the way, anything I said or mentioned or cited in this presentation, look it up, verify it. I mean, use a critical mind, because I'm going to ask you to do the same thing when you hear the other side, the propaganda from the other side. See, they have the power, they have the money, but you know what? We say, no matter what you do, you cannot cover the sun. With these propaganda, with these lies. At the end, we're the rightful indigenous people of that land, and we're willing to accept you to live side by side as equal. Are you willing? The question is for them, not for us. We're the one who suffered at their hand, and even that is a sacrifice, to even live next to somebody who oppressed you. We're willing to make that sacrifice, and that's very generous from us. Are they willing to accept that?
Mm-hmm. As we bring things to a close, I want to give you a moment to share a few final words to our listening audience. But before we do that, I just want to remind people that this has been recorded. So if people want to use this as a resource to educate other people and to also share the presentation from Yassar tonight, you can also have that available to you. And I'm being reminded that in the comments section, Paula Rainey is posting resources for those who want more information want to learn more about the Palestinian situation, history, and current events, she's posting some resources there in the comments section. And so with that, let me turn it back to Yassar for closing words and the charge you want to give us to our listening audience today.
So it's, many Palestinians would tell you, or actually, we've had 73 years of oppression, 73 years living under occupation, 73 years living as second and third class citizen. We are suffering, and it's to a huge part being done in your name with your tax money. You are unwillingly being complicit, not only by financing Israel, but because the American government is shielding Israel from from any legal or international consequence. UN resolution apply to everybody. We have a veto record as a United States. We vetoed an upward of 40 UN resolution condemning Israel, calling for Israel to yield and to grant Palestinian an independent homeland and self-determination. That's happening in your name. Isn't it about time we said never again? I'm going to tell you actually a quick story. When it comes to our Jewish friends and allies too, and those who try to conflate anti-Israel and anti-Zionism and with that of anti-Jewishness, never fear. They try to weaponize that. They try to use it against you. They will try to put pressure on you, just like you mentioned, our Congress members. But as one time we had a Holocaust survivor, we brought him here in Sacramento at Salam Center, and he was an outspoken critic of Israel. And at one point, they had a demonstration outside, and at one point he stopped, and he said the difference between me, the Jews like me, and the people outside is they are saying never again for us. I say never again for anybody. Nobody should see what we went through during the Holocaust. Nobody should see the oppression. So it's for these people that I salute them, and I'd like to be, with them in the same trench, shoulder to shoulder, to fight injustice everywhere. And you can do that. We already went about it peacefully. Educate yourself about boycott, divestment, and sanction. That's the tool that brought liberty and equality to South Africa. Educate support Palestinian and pro-Palestinian organization and pro-Palestinian candidates. And one thing, they got to tell you in your local central committees and democratic clubs that's not our issue. That's we are only worried about the sewage and the water and the electricity bill. That's our concern in California. No, Democratic Party is a national party, and we once we assume the administration, once we have a president that is Democratic in the White House, guess what? He should be reiterating what we want him to say. He should be expressing the will of the people. That's the principle of democracy. That's why we need to reclaim democracy to our Democratic Party. So put the pressure on our politician, especially in the Democrats. Tell them, yes, we want a fair, human right-based international policy, and that applies to everybody, but not everybody except Palestine. There must be consistency. We need to condition our funds. Our funds should not be used to oppress other people. I don't have a problem. You want to give Israel billions of dollars? Fine, but don't use it to oppress other people. I don't know how what kind of mechanism we're gonna have to control that, but fine. Condition it. on giving freedom to Palestinian, ending the oppression, and maybe push them to one-state solution. Run for offices. Believe in yourself. Run for offices. Assume your offices. If you believe you don't have a proper candidate, look for one. And if you don't want to run yourself, look for someone, convince them to run. Somebody who you resonate, you feel that your voice or that he or she voices your concern and your true belief, and encourage them, campaign for them, raise funds for them, write letters to your local electeds, and be it federal or state, demonstrate, reach out, and network. And you know what? If you are with the other civil rights organization like Black Lives Matter, or anti or against organization that promote that fights against anti-Asian hate, try to build bridges, because each group of us, we're minorities in our callings and our agenda, but we're stronger together. So reach out and try to build bridges between them and the pro-Palestinian, because that makes us all stronger. Donate your money, your time, if you didn't have it, your time, and educate yourself before you educate people. I go back to what I started with, that I love that saying by can't remember now, sorry. I'm having one of those blank moments. But the biggest threat to knowledge is not ignorance. It's the illusion of knowledge. Try to really question everything, even what you were taught to believe that is a given, that is the truth. Re-question yourself. Question everything you believed in, and have a critical mind. When you listen to the media, search for your media. Don't rely on one source. And with that, onward. God bless you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Yassar, for taking time to be with us tonight. And thank you all who are tuned in to view with us as well. And just be reminded, this has been recorded. So if you'd like to use it as a resource for more education for your organizations or different community groups, please contact Alameda Progressives. Thank you, and everybody have a good evening.